What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another critter format video. And in today's video, I'm going to continue exploring the sort of cannon burn deck, which is a very aggro deck that has some burn tools to finish off the opponent at the end of the game. Although my adjustments to the deck have maybe taken out a little bit of that burn element of the deck. Now, in my last video covering this deck, I was playing the build that the Duel's Fusion used to actually get into the top cut of a critter tournament. So that build was very, very good. It worked out for them. But I think for me, I had some complaints with it. So I wanted to try tinkering with it a little bit. I noticed that in some of the games, I bricked too easily on things like Tremendous Fire, clogging up the hand, when I couldn't actually get to a point where it was actually advantageous to use this card. So in adjusting the deck, I cut down on the Tremendous Fires. I still have one because I think it is good just to clear that last bit of damage at the end of the game, but having more than one in the deck can lead to those bricky sort of situations that I want to avoid. So I took out two Tremendous Fires, I moved them to the side deck, where I think in games 2 and 3, maybe you can go for a more burny strategy, just siding in these to catch your opponent off guard potentially. But I took out two Tremendous Fires and I swapped them in with Sangans. Now you might be thinking, well, Sangan isn't going to be that useful in this deck. It only has a couple targets, which is much better because it can search out pretty much any other card in our deck. And that is true, which is the better recruiter in this deck, but I think Sangan serves some key purposes. It can fetch Witch, which means that it's fetching you the recruiter to recruit anything in your deck, which isn't that bad. And it can also fetch a Cannon Soldier, which at the end of the game can be very, very good at just finishing off your opponent's life points. In addition, Sangan has 1,000 attack, so on an empty board state, it can be used effectively as a Tremendous Fire. Sure, it can't connect if your opponent's like a Battle Trap, like Mirror Force, or if your opponent has like a Woboku or something. But in those cases, you've gotten your opponent to use up a card, and if they did use a removal card on your Sangan, you actually get an additional card out of that. So I don't think that exchange is too bad. And if you do manage to connect for 1,000, then it's basically served the purpose of a Tremendous Fire already, although it has cost you your normal summon. So that's my logic behind including the Sangans in the deck. This also increases the monster count in the deck, which I think is important, as a lot of the games that I played, I was struggling to find a monster. So I think that this card is a very, very good inclusion. I think it does improve the deck in my eyes, at least for my style of playing this deck. Since I've gone in depth on my inclusion of Sangan, let's talk about all the other cards in the deck as well, in case you missed the last video. So as I said before, this deck is intending to go very aggressive using big beaters like Jiraigumo and Dark Elf that can get over pretty much anything that your opponent has to just get ahead on damage. And once you've hit a certain damage threshold where you can more easily kill your opponent, you can use things like Cannon Soldier and Tremendous Fire to burn your opponent to death at the end of the game. We're also playing 3 Lodgin, 3 7-colored fish as additional 1,800 beaters, which are all very good. And we're playing Witch, as I mentioned before, to search out anything in the deck. Sangan can search Witch, it can also search Cannon Soldier. So that's basically it for the monsters. One last subtlety to note is that we're only playing 2 Dark Elf and 3 Jiraigumo, because while Jiraigumo can have a steeper cost if you call the coin flip wrong, you can always attack with Jiraigumo no matter how low your life points get, as opposed to Dark Elf, which you can't really use later in the game as effectively. If you have less than 1,000 life points at the end of the game, Dark Elf can't even attack. So Dark Elf is much better in the early game. Moving on from the monsters, we of course have the limited 5 spell cards, Change of Heart, Dark Hole, Monster Reborn, Pot of Greed, and Raigeki. All just incredibly, incredibly good at keeping the offensive pressure going, clearing away your opponent's resources, and gaining resources of your own. We also have 3 Fisher to just act as even more removal, clear the way for our monsters to get in. We have 2 Heavy Storm to clear the back row that our opponent might have to let our monsters attack in as well. We have 2 Swords of Revealing Light because it can be useful just to draw into more monsters if you're lacking them. It can also force your opponent to use up like a Heavy Storm on this, and it can also flip up opponent's monsters to enable you to use something like Fisher to clear the way to get in for even more damage. And of course, we're on one Tremendous Fire. Maybe this is an iffy inclusion. You might want to cut this for a card that does a bit more. But I do think that being able to kill your opponent out of nowhere when they're at a very low amount of life is useful. So I'm still including it. Maybe I'll cut it in the future, but I still like it at 1 in this deck for now. For the traps, we have a Mirror Force, which is just insane if you manage to pull it off. We have 3 Trap Hold, act as removal on your opponent's turn. We have 3 Uboku, which is great at protecting your monsters and your life points, and preventing the effects of monsters like White Magical Hat and Mass Sorcerer from being able to go off. And lastly, we have 3 7 Tools of the Bandit. Now, the reason we have 7 tools instead of something like Solemn Judgment or Magic Jammer or something like that is that we really care about the traps that our opponent is going to use against us more than anything else. Since our deck is so attack-oriented, if our opponent flips up like a Mirror Force, that can be really, really bad for us. If they flip up a Trap Hole to remove one of our few beaters, that can also be incredibly bad for us. And if we're pushing for game and they flip up a Woboku to try and protect themselves, 7 tools can win the game just on its own, just negating that Woboku, preventing our opponent from stopping the damage and killing them out of nowhere. So 7 tools is what we're going with here instead of Solemn. I also mixed up the side deck a bit. I cut the D-Spells and some other cards that I thought were kind of iffy. I included some card destructions and Robin Goblins, which are good against like Exodia strategies and things like that. It can also just be a surprise to your opponent to side into like a hand control sort of strategy, so you can catch them off guard with this a bit as well. I also have 3 Man-Eater Bug if your opponent's on a more monster-focused strategy, or if they're playing something like Flip Control, which wants to protect their flip monsters, then Man-Eater Bug can be good in those cases. Also playing 3 Princess of Tsurugi if our opponent's playing a more back row heavy deck. Just getting that burn damage in can also kill our opponent out of nowhere. And lastly, 3 Solemn Judgments. If our opponent's playing less of an aggressive deck that we think has less offensive capability to kill us, then this can be good to include over the 7 tools. But that's my take on the deck. Will these Sangans actually improve the deck, or will it turn out that Tremendous Fire would have been better? Only one way to find out, so let's dive into some games. We've got a game against Deo Zomph here, who longtime fans of the channel will recognize from a lot of the Yugi Kaiba games we played. So they're a very awesome duelist. They always play some very interesting decks. So let's see how this game goes. Looks like they are going to be able to go first here. And this is not a terrible hand. It would be nice to get more monsters, but 7 tools is nice. We can protect our 7-colored fish with that potentially. Dark Hole can also clear their board if they manage to get an aggressive push on field, and Woboku can protect ourselves from that aggressive push. So we're feeling pretty good about this. Pot of Greed's kind of rough, and then they're going to set 2 and pass. This is kind of iffy, because if they do have Magician of Faith, then getting back that Pot of Greed is insanely good for them. So we could just Dark Hole here preemptively. However, if that's just a Sangan or a Witch, then we get majorly punished by that play. And they can even search a Magician of Faith off of the Sangan and Witch. So I don't think we can afford to do that, even though they're getting such a powerful card back with Magician of Faith, if it is Magician of Faith. So we've just got to go for it. We just go for 7-colored fish. They're going to think about that, and it's going to be fine. And we're just going to attack in, hoping it's not Magician. Unfortunately, it is Magician of Faith, so they will be able to get back Pot of Greed, which is extremely unfortunate for us. And there it goes. Kind of rough. We're just going to set a Woboku instead of 7 tools and pass. The reason we do this is they've got a back row of their own. So if they heavy storm here, we can chain Woboku. They'll lose their own back row. We'll lose 7 tools, sure, but we do have an additional 7 tools in hand. So it's not the worst if they heavy this, and it is good to have 7 tools on the table because that can protect whatever monsters we bring out a little bit more. And given that we're low on monsters, we really need all the protection we can get. They're just going to fish away the 7-colored fish, so we can't really protect against that. They're going to bring out a Witch and just attack in. Kind of unfortunate. We do lose 11 here. We're not going to Woboku that. And they're going to Pot of Greed in main phase 2. draw 2 more, set 1, and pass back. Dark Elf is okay. We can bring it out and attack over the Witch at least. It's kind of rough because we'll lose 1,000 to do this. But I think we have to. We do have Trap Hole in hand in case they search out anything that can beat over the Dark Elf. So I think we're just going to do it. They're going to activate Trap Hole. We need to 7 tools this because we don't have any monsters in hand to follow it up with. And we're just going to attack in. If it's Mirror Force, that's really bad for us. They can clear the Dark Elf, and we won't have any follow-up. But thankfully, it doesn't look like it is. So they'll be able to search. They'll get a 7-colored fish. And we're just going to set a Trap Hole. We want to play around if they do the sort of, summon out 7-colored fish, activate Fisher, get in for more damage play. It looks like they're not going to do that, though. They're just going to set 1 and pass. And we don't really have an incentive to attack in. Dark Elf is going to cost us 1,000 life points every time we attack. And unless we're actually getting in for damage, I don't think it's actually worth it to do that. If that set is a recruiter, then they're just going to get more cards to hand while we do this. So it's not even beneficial. So we're just going to leave things as they are. They're going to bring out a Cannon Soldier, and we're going to see if they want to use priority on its effect. And they are indeed going to use priority. We're going to chain Trap Hole. So while we do lose 500 from this, they will lose their Cannon Soldier. And I think we had to do that because if they had like a Fisher, they could get in for even more damage. And we don't really have to want a Dark Hole, a 1 lone Cannon Soldier. So we just need to clear this out of the way. Potentially we could get in for 2,000 next turn, which would be pretty nice. But they are going to get a search with the Sangan. They're going to add Starboy. That's a very interesting inclusion. So that implies that they're probably on some sort of water tribal strategy, which is super interesting. And can give our deck a little bit of trouble. If they're able to set up Starboy and a 7-colored fish, that can actually beat over our Dark Elf. Luckily, we do have another Trap Hole in hand to prevent that a little bit, but it's a bit worrying. They are going to activate Swords, unfortunately, and we don't really have a way to deal with that. So we're just going to have to bide our time. Luckily, Dark Elf's 2,000 attack can also serve as a bit of a wall. It's tough to get over Dark Elf in normal situations, and it's going to be even tougher for them now because we do have a Trap Hole to prevent the Starboy from hitting the field if they try and bring it out. So we're going to set the Trap Hole and pass back to them. They're going to set 1, set another, pass back. We draw Sangan, which is really nice. We can just set the Sangan and pass back to them. And keep in mind, if you want to keep track of how Tremendous Fire would have been in this game versus Sangan, this would have been a Tremendous Fire if we had kept our deck the way it was originally. So for people keeping track at home, you can sort of compare how this build of the deck would do against the previous build in this matchup. They're going to bring out Great White, and we could Trap Hole that, but we don't honestly feel the need to until they bring out a Starboy. Oh, that Raigeki's kind of rough, but actually not really, because they do clear our entire board here, but we do get a search with the Sangan. We get to add back a Witch, and we can just Dark Hole their board next turn anyways. We don't even need to Trap Hole anything. We can just use Woboku here. We have another Woboku in hand, so it's not the worst. And yeah, we're feeling good about this. We'll let them flip out that Starboy. And we're just going to activate Woboku, try and protect ourselves. Unfortunately, they do a Solemn Judgment for this Woboku, so they will be able to get in for a ton of damage here. Luckily, we're still alive, but if they have Reborn to bring back the Cannon Soldier, we just lose. So it's a bit of a risky situation here, but we're still alive, and we'll take it while we can. They are just going to pass back to us with this, and we're going to Dark Hole the board because we might as well. They're going to think about that, but let that go through. We're just going to set the Witch, set a Woboku, pass back to them. They're going to Dark Hole the Witch, which means we do get to get a search off the Witch. So we're going to do that real quick. Think about what to get. We are going to get the 7-colored fish because we figure this can counter their Starboy shenanigans a little bit. And when they bring out the Lodging, we're going to try and activate Trap Hole. They're going to chain Judgment to that, but this is part of the reason why we did activate Trap Hole, because this way our Woboku will be able to go through here. So they're going to pay half, and this is actually really good for us because now they're below 1,800 life points. So we could just potentially win next turn. If If we summon out the 7-colored fish, fisher away their Lodgin, then we're all set. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to activate Wuboku, and then try and go for game here, although it's a bit risky because they do have one set. So unfortunately, we don't have 7 tools set. Maybe we should have set it a turn ago, but I think we were trying to play around heavy a little bit. Might come back to bite us here. Let's find out. We attack in, and it is Wuboku. So if we had 7 tools, we could have won the game there. But all that being said, it's not the worst. At least it wasn't Mirror Force. So we still do have a monster on field. We're going to set the 7 tools. It's unlikely to really come up at this point, but if it does, it'll be very nice for us. They're just going to set one and pass. That's very good to see. And that Swords means that we do have the game on lock. We're going to activate Sword of Revealing Light, fisher away their monster, and if they do have a Kuriboh in the deck, then this isn't quite game. But it looks like they don't, and that will be the end of the game. I actually think there, if we had the Tremendous Fires in deck instead of the Sangan, then we might have actually lost that because we weren't drawing too many monsters, and that Sangan kept us on monsters. It enabled us to get Witch, and Witch then enabled us to get 7-colored fish, which enabled us to finish out the game at the end there. Tremendous Fire could have dealt 1,000 damage, but, you know, that 1,000 wouldn't have quite gotten us to lethal. So, who knows? I do think that this shows off how Sangans can be very useful in this deck, and I'm really happy that I'm playing them now. It feels a lot better just to have continual access to monsters. But we choose not to side here. I think we've got a decent matchup against Water Tribal, as long as we're being smart about what we potentially trap whole. So, we're just going to go to game 3 and see how it goes. We're going to go second again, because they did lose the last game, so they get to choose, and this hand's very interesting. We'd like to see a monster, but honestly, it's not the worst. They're just going to set one pass, and we draw 7-colored fish, which is very interesting. We could just summon out the 7-colored fish, set a Wuboku, and pass. If they choose to attack in with Lodgin next turn, then we could Wuboku that to protect it, then Heavy Storm whatever else they have set. We could just Raigeki their Lodgin away, though. Try bringing out 7-colored fish, attacking in. A lot of different things we could do here. We're going to bring out 7-colored fish. They do have Trap Hole, unfortunately. So that does simplify things a little bit, though. There's no need to Raigeki now if we can't really go on the aggressive after this. So we're just going to set a Mirror Force and pass. We figure it's likely that they bring out another monster. But even if they don't, it can be good just to clear that Lodgin, reborn the 7-colored fish next turn, and get in for 1,800. But let's see what they do. They're going to bring out a Witch and try and attack in for a ton of damage. We're going to Mirror Force this. They do get a card to hand with the Witch. So it's not the best Mirror Force in the world, but it will protect us from a lot of damage. And it will clear that Lodgin, which is very nice. So they will get a 7-card fish of their own to hand. And then they're just going to pass back to us. We could reborn out a 7-card fish here. That could be pretty good. Set a Wuboku to back it up. If they summon out a 7-card fish of their own and try attacking in, we can Wuboku to protect it. And I think that is what we're going to do. We're going to reborn the 7-card fish, attack in for 18, and then just set a Wuboku pass. They're going to bring out Starboy, and this is interesting. Oh, they're Change of Hearting. So this will be a lot of damage on board here. We're kind of getting punished for reviving 7-colored fish instead of Lodgin, but I think this was the right move. Just in case, you know, they were able to set up Starboy 7-card fish on their side of the field. We could Wuboku this, as it is a lot of damage to take. But I think we want to save the Wuboku for if they try attacking into our 7-card fish with their 7-card fish. So we will just take all that damage. It's 3350 total, which is kind of rough. They're going to set one pass back to us. And in case that set is like a Mirror Force or something, we're not actually going to bring out the Lodgin yet. We're just going to attack in with the 7-colored. It's a Wuboku, so, you know, I don't feel too bad about not bringing out the Lodgin here anyways. And they're just going to pass back to us. They're going to Heavy Storm, and we're just going to chain Wuboku. Pretty good value off of that. They're going to Raigeki away our 7-colored, which is kind of unfortunate, and then bring out a 7-colored of their own. Now, we could Raigeki this board away, summon out Lodgin, get in for 18, but I don't really think we need to. If we attack into Starboy with Lodgin, then they're left with just the 7-colored fish, which, can crash with Lodgin, sure. But I honestly think we're okay with that trade because we do have Witch in hand. So we're just going to bring out Lodgin, clear that Starboy, and then set a heavy as a bluff. If they heavy our heavy, I honestly is perfectly fine with that, as they've already used up one heavy here. So that means that they'll have used up all their heavies, which gives us a lot more options. And we do have this additional heavy in hand if they do clear this heavy. So I think that bluff is fine. They're going to bring out another 7-colored fish, and they are just going to try crashing. We don't have any way to stop that, so we'll crash, and they'll be able to attack in for 18. But they're down to one monster, and we've got Witch, so I think it's pretty good. We are just going to activate Heavy Storm right away. It was a Solemn Judgment, so I'm glad we did activate that heavy. And we clear the 7-color with the Dark Hole. We have a Raigeki in hand if they are able to establish a board presence. But I think, with no cards on field or in hand, we're in a pretty good position here. We're just going to pass back to them because I think we can save the heavy, honestly. The only reason we would set a heavy is to bluff them into potentially setting cards of their own. But if they draw a trap card here or a spell card they want to set as a bluff, then it can't really do anything against our board anyways, so we don't really need to have the heavy face down. We can just activate it next turn. They draw a Pot of Greed, though. That is a bit of a wrinkle. That does change the game a little bit. But they're just going to set one and pass. We could heavy that. But honestly, if they Mirror Force a Witch, then that's pretty fine. And if we bring out Sangan to attack additionally, I think it's honestly okay. They probably don't have Reborn in hand or a monster in hand either, or else they would have brought it out or activated it last turn. So I don't think we're actually at risk of dying here if they do Mirror Force our whole board. And Mirror Forcing Sangan and Witch can enable us to get 2 monsters to hand for later. So honestly, we're just going to go for it. We're just going to bring out Sangan and try attacking in for a bunch of damage. They do have Ultimate Offering, and Ultimate Offering can change things a little bit. They're going to set a monster from hand, and we're going to attack in with the Witch, and it is a Mask of Darkness. So they will be able to get back Woboku. It's kind of rough, but honestly not the worst. We're going to attack in with Sangan, and we're just going to pass back to them. Again, we don't really feel the need to set the heavy. We can just activate it later. And I don't think they really have a way to kill us here. They're going to activate Swords, which is pretty good. So we could Heavy Storm here, clear their whole board away, attack in for 21. But they didn't set the Woboku last turn, so it doesn't seem like they're too worried about that. So if they have the read that we don't have heavy, they might continue to not set Woboku in the future. Because of that, I think we can actually wait until we draw another monster, or if they bring out a monster and attack into one of our recruiters and get a powerful monster to hand, then I think we can wait till that. So we're actually not going to use the heavy right now. We're just going to switch our recruiters to defense and pass back to them. And they're just going to pass back to us. We might as well set the trap hole because, we can clear a monster with it. And if we are forced to heavy the trap hole, not honestly that big of a deal because we're likely going for game anyways. So we'll just set the trap hole. They're going to pass back to us. The last turn on Swords, the Swords will expire. Maybe I should have gone for the aggressive here, as it is very likely that they'll set Woboku now after the Swords is gone. But they're just going to bring out a Sangan and attack into our Sangan. That is perfectly fine. We can use the Sangan to search a Cannon Soldier, which is very nice. And we wouldn't have been able to get off that search if the Sangan was just a tremendous fire. We would have been able to deal 1,000, but we already were able to deal 1,000 with the Sangan. So honestly, I think we got more than a tremendous fire's value from the Sangan. Woboku isn't a bad draw. I think we do just Heavy Storm the board away here. They will activate Woboku most likely, but we'll be able to clear some very powerful cards. So we were able to clear the trap hole. Very happy about that. They are going to chain the Woboku, unfortunately. We're going to set our Woboku, and then we're going to summon out Cannon Soldier and just use its effect right away. We're going to tribute off the Witch and search out a bigger beater from our deck. We can potentially just win next turn with this. If they don't have like another Uboku, we can bring out Lodgin, fisher away their Sangan, just attack in for game. So we're feeling pretty good about this. But let's see what they do. They're going to bring out a Cannon Soldier of their own, and they're going to try attacking in here. We're just going to activate Uboku, which means that their Cannon Soldier will die from that. But honestly, even if they hadn't attacked in, we would have game here because we've got Raigeki. Luckily, we don't need the Raigeki. We can just activate a Fisher, clear that Sangan, and it looks like all that was left in hand was a Starboy. So I really liked the Sangans in this deck. I mean, yes, I know that, Water Tribal is not the most meta threat in the format, but I think this match still shows off the value that Sangan can add to the deck over something like Tremendous Fire. Now, I think there's still definitely room for the deck to change in the future, but I think this is a good first step. I am curious to see if the one Tremendous Fire still left in the deck will come up at a later point, so I'm definitely planning on playing more games with this, refining it further in the future, but I'm happy with this current build for now. If you enjoyed this match and want to be updated when I upload more Critter matches in the future, then please be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're almost at 200. We're about like 10 subscribers away last I checked, and I think it would be really cool to reach 200 by the end of the month. Maybe it's unlikely at this point since it is getting close to Halloween, but I'm hoping that we can reach that milestone. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also like the video if you enjoyed it. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.